Hello, this is John Hesse, Cahokia Presbyterian Church, reading from Of Moose and Men by Tori Martin and Doug Peterson, reading the chapter entitled On Fire for God. By now, it probably seems as if Rob is the sane one and I'm some kind of a crazed sidekick. I'm not going to deny that characterization, but I should point out that Rob is not level-headed 100% of the time. He, too, sometimes tastes the flavor of stupid. To back up this claim, let me refer you to the case of the burning trailer. In Alaska, the thaw doesn't usually begin until April or May, when the ice breakup appears and the snow finally melts, uncovering all the stuff in people's yards that had been buried through the long winter. The refrain that echoes across the land is, "Oh, so that's where that went to." The snowmelt also uncovers quite a lot of trash, so the city of Anchorage sponsors a free dump day every spring. When this story opens, dump day has arrived, a beautiful afternoon with temperatures at a balmy 45 degrees. People everywhere were in their yards collecting trash, and we were no exception. We had plenty of garbage, including a couple of big items. We no longer needed the huge foam-lined shipping container that we'd been using all winter as an outdoor refrigerator. Knowing that the bears were hibernating, we had stocked the 4-foot-wide styrofoam-lined box with food, secure in the knowledge that it would be safe from sleeping Bruins. But it was now May. Time to dispose of the foam-lined container in the dump. Our burn barrel was also on its last leg, so we decided to get rid of it as well and obtain a new one. Bob nested the old burn barrel inside the shipping container, and he loaded it all in the back of an open trailer. "Are you sure you should put the burn barrel in that?" I asked, but Rob just scoffed. "We haven't used that barrel for 3 days, so stop worrying." So Rob took off, pulling the trailer of junk, and I followed close behind in our Jeep. It was an idyllic day, and Rob noticed that the people seemed particularly friendly as he drove to the dump. As he passed by a subdivision, everyone seemed to be looking up from their yard work and waving at Rob, and he smiled and waved back. Evidently, the spring thaw had also thawed the hearts of every Alaskan he saw. Suddenly, it dawned on Rob that not everyone was smiling as they waved. When he passed 2 teenage boys, their mouths were open in horror, and they were pointing at Rob's truck. That's when Rob finally looked into a side view mirror and saw that the trailer had become a fireball. Flames shot 30 feet high out of the trailer, and he appeared to be pulling a giant blowtorch on wheels. Although the burn barrel hadn't been used for a few days, it still contained some coals, and evidently they were hot enough to ignite the foam lining of the shipping container. The onrush of air as he drove downhill fed the flames with oxygen, and the fireball grew and grew. I know, because I was driving right behind Rob, and I'd seen it burst into flames. I tried leaning on the horn, but this was my discount Jeep, remember? The horn didn't work, but that didn't stop me from hitting it over and over. I tried speeding up and pulling alongside Rob, but whenever I did, oncoming traffic forced me back into my lane. I was afraid the big ball of flame was going to explode, like something you would see in a Terminator movie. When Rob finally spotted the giant fireball in the side view mirror, he immediately pulled the truck to the side of the road. Fortunately, he kept a fire extinguisher in the truck, so he leaped out and began to douse the flames. He brought it under control, but the charred jumble was still smoldering, and he was afraid it might burst into flame again if he got it back on the road. So we decided to douse everything with water from a creek that ran close to the road. Only one problem. The only container we had in the back of the trailer was an old gasoline can. This plastic can was riddled with holes, and it hadn't been used to carry gasoline for several years, so thankfully it was empty. Otherwise, the trailer might have exploded, just as I feared. He used the leaky gas can as a water container, and he kept filling it up on the creek and running up the hill to dump it on the smoldering trash in the back of the trailer. The still hot materials hissed back at us and smoked. Rob must have made a strange sight to passerbys in cars and trucks. This guy appeared to be emptying a gas can on a smoldering fire. As I said, I'm not the only nutty one in our cabin. If this incident doesn't convince you that Rob occasionally tastes the flavor of stupid, let me also refer you to the strange case of the booming burn barrel. It seemed that burn barrels had a way of bringing the crazy out in him. One day, Rob set a gasoline can about 10 feet from the burn barrel. "That can is awfully close to the barrel, don't you think?" I said. "Stop freaking out. I know what I'm doing. But I'm pretty sure that's not safe. And I'm pretty sure you need to stop freaking out." The next morning, Rob was outside burning trash in the barrel, but as he dumped cardboard boxes in the can, they just wouldn't catch fire. There were smoldering coals in the bottom of the barrel. Sound familiar? But evidently, they weren't hot enough to ignite the cardboard. That's when Rob's eyes landed on the gasoline can I'd warned him about. The can contained only a little bit of gasoline, so he figured it wouldn't hurt to pour it on the smoldering coals and give the fire a little encouragement. He gave the fire a lot more than a little encouragement. Rob was pouring out the last little bit of gasoline when he saw a flame jump from the bottom of the burn barrel to the can, which was still in his hand. It happened in a flash before he had the chance to react. Kabloom! Rob told me later the only thing he remembered thinking was, "Boy, was that stupid." The next thing he knew, he was completely on fire. I was still in bed when I heard the kabloom, and I knew immediately what had happened. Dashing outside, I found Rob completely engulfed in flames. I mean completely engulfed. The explosion caused the gasoline to spatter his clothing, so his shirt was on fire and so was his pants. Remembering the old rule, stop, drop, and roll, Rob did just that, but the flames would not go out. So I leaped back up and yanked the burning T-shirt over his head and tossed it aside. But that exposed his bare belly to the fire that still shot up from his flaming pants. So the Human Torch pulled down his pants and tried to kick them off, but he couldn't get them over his work boots. By the time I reached him, he was sitting on the ground with his pants around his ankles, patting at the flames wildly. I'm all right, he said. "You don't look all right." He probably would have been a lot more convincing if he hadn't still been smoldering when he told me he was okay. Rob finally managed to douse the flames, and as he put it, he wound up with second-degree burns to his body and a third-degree burn to his male ego. The entire right side of his face was red, as if he'd gotten a bad sunburn or stood too close to a nuclear test explosion. He also had second-degree burns on his belly and on his right hand, which had been holding the gas can when it exploded. The can was torn apart, but his hand was in one piece. After these two fiery incidents, I can say that I can relate to the prophets of old. I'm not saying I'm a prophet in any way, but I did get a sense of what it's like to issue a warning over and over and not be taken seriously. When I warned Rob about the burn barrel in the trailer or the gas can near the barrel, he dismissed me with a roll of his eyes and a wave of his hand. I wouldn't have been surprised if Isaiah had been similarly dismissed by the Israelites. "Stop freaking out, Izzy." The prophets were busy during the period of the divided kingdom, when Israel split apart from Judah following the death of Solomon. During this time, Elijah, Elisha, Amos, Isaiah, Hosea, and Micah all tried to warn the people of Judah and Israel to stop running after false gods and turn back to Yahweh. But inevitably, the chosen people would say, "Don't be such a worrywart." Josiah, a king in Judah from 640 to 609 BC, tried to eliminate all the temples dedicated to the god Moloch. But this god and others kept popping up through the land like the smoldering coals in our burn barrel. Ironically, Moloch was a god of fire. And many historians believe that children were sacrificed through fire to this demonic idol. Today, we no longer worship a god of fire like Moloch or a god of fertility like Baal, but we still have our own 21st century gods. They go by our other names: pornography, greed, success at any cost, apathy, and much, much more. So we need to listen for the warnings in our lives. Warnings from friends who care enough to point out the smoldering coals in our lives that might burst into flame if we're not careful. These people are the prophets in our lives. Prophets are like smoke detectors, which can sense invisible particles well before you see smoke or fire. So make sure you have people in your life who aren't afraid to tell you when you're dragging along a barrel full of hot coals that could burst into flame at any moment. And while you're at it, clean up the spiritual trash in your life, because God sponsors a dump day every single day of the year. Thank you very much. God bless you.